Welcome to the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. My name is Kimberly Jackson, and I'm the Executive Director. We're very proud today to have an amazing program on agriculture in Florida, and we have a host of panel of experts from across the agricultural field. Before I introduce our amazing panel and moderator today, I want to share a little bit about what the Institute is. The Institute was created by Congressman Bill Young. We're very honored to walk in his shoes of having nonpartisan social, political, and economic programming to provide solutions and to support the Florida college system. We have an amazing team, and we hope that you take time to go to our website to learn more about us at isps.spcollege.edu. Now on to our panel. Our moderator, who by no means is shy to the Institute, is Mark Trujillo, and he is a portfolio officer with the Humana Foundation. Before joining Humana in 2019, he worked both in agricultural research and agricultural extension as a SNAP-Ed public health specialist in Florida. Mark has co-created several programs related to a local food systems and continues to support scalable practices in local food systems and social connectedness. When not working, Mark can be found taking walks with his wife, cultivating community, or cheering on one of his 4 children. Our panelists now, Monica Petrella is a passionate advocate for regional food systems. She first learned about the power of regional economic systems while attending the Small Farms Conference hosted by UF-IFAS in 2012. She attended the University of Florida, where she graduated with her BS in Food and Resource Economics, supplemented with a minor in Organic and Sustainable Crop Production. She then later attended the University of Vermont to earn an MS in Community Development and Applied Economics, specializing in community food systems. She has also worked on small farms and farm-to-table restaurants, volunteered in community gardens, and met a variety of stakeholders in the Tampa Bay food system. Previously, she has been involved in community organizing and political advocacy, but recently started a new position as Hillsborough County as the food system coordinator. Thank you, Monica, for your time. Our panelist, Dr. Catherine Campbell, joined the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Sciences at UF in October 2019. Her appointment is 70% extension and 30% research. She is located at the UF-IFAS Mid-Florida Research and Education Center in Apopka, Florida. Before joining the department, she held 3 positions in IFAS, Research Associate in Food Systems and Community Health at Program for Resource Efficient Communities. She has a postdoctoral associate in the Family Nutrition Program and State Food Systems Curriculum Developer in Horticultural Sciences. And prior to that, she spent 7 years at Georgetown University, where she taught ethical theory and was the managing editor for the journal Ethics, an international journal of social, political, and legal philosophy. And finally, our last panelist, and thank you, Dr. Campbell, it's Dr. Javier Garces, and he is a professor and the program chair for the Plant Science and Agricultural Technology program at Valencia College. He is a professor for or has taught the following courses: Introduction to Plant Science, Principles of Hydroponics, Introduction to Sustainable Agriculture, Plant Pathology, Plant Physiology, and Plant Propagation. He is responsible for an on-campus greenhouse, which includes an aquaponics system, vertical towers, and box gardens. A Miami, Florida native, Dr. Garces graduated from the University of Florida, where he also obtained a BS in General Horticulture and eventually a Doctor of Plant Medicine degree. And prior to Valencia College, he worked as a plant health specialist over approximately 1,600 acres of containerized plant production for a company that had 2 farms specializing in woody ornament plant production for Skinner Nurseries in Bunnell, Florida. A farmer at heart, he likes to keep one foot in horticulture by visiting farms and nurseries to consult with farmers on how to better grow their crops. As I said before we started, this is a powerhouse of panelists. I hope I got your bios and the technical jargon correct. I always say, as a lawyer, it's always hard to speak outside your specific language, but I hope I did serve you all well. In any event, this is going to be a well-done conversation with experts, and we welcome you to start your questions in the Q&A now. And with that, I will transfer it over to Mark, and thank you again for your time, Mark.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much, Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, for hosting this conversation. Very important conversation. Some of you may be wondering why Mark is moderating this panel. I wanted to give an opportunity to make that connection with my role at Humana Foundation. At Humana, we put health first, and that means taking bold action to improve equitable outcomes for the people that we serve. The Humana Foundation was established in 1981 to expand our impact in communities across the country. As a philanthropic arm of Humana Inc., we focus on health equity, working to eliminate unjust, avoidable, and unnecessary barriers to health and healthcare. The foundation fosters evidence-based collaborations and investments that help people in underserved communities live connected, healthy lives. As good stewards of health, the foundation creates healthy, supports innovative and evidence-based programs that align with our priorities. And our grants portal is currently open. So for more information about that, visit humanafoundation.org. And now, as Kim said, my name is Mark Trujillo, and I enjoy being a food insecurity and food systems analyst and fanboy who works to manage our programmatic portfolio in Florida and Louisiana. As a host for today's conversation, I'm really glad to be having a conversation with our esteemed panelists. So without further ado, let's dive in to this really important topic. Our first question that we're gonna address, I'll throw it over to Monica. Monica, hey, how you doing?
Hey.
Good. Thanks for joining here. I wanted to have you frame out a little bit for our guests the significance of Florida agriculture, not only to Floridians, but also to the country and the world. A lot of people don't realize how important this industry is, and you work with producers every day.
Yeah, so Florida ag has been part of our state's identity since before we were even a state. And so there is a lot of evidence that shows how indigenous people took advantage of agricultural systems using the oceans and the estuaries, and then also doing agriculture in their lands. Obviously that has changed throughout the years, but a lot of kind of the same basic fundamentals from back in the 1500s and before are still some of the practices that we see today. And then beyond the indigenous people that inhabited Florida, we saw in the 1500s that the Spanish started bringing cattle over. Cattle is a huge part of our agricultural identity and our economic driver. And anybody who's ever driven around the state is definitely familiar with seeing lots of happy cows out in our pastures. And so economically, agriculture in Florida contributes over $9 billion a year in economic force. And so it is the second largest economic driver in the state next to tourism. But agriculture was here first, way before Florida had any of the tourist drives that we had now, even before the roadside attraction with the springs, way before Disney. Agriculture was the state's biggest economic driver. And you can see a lot of that history in some of the historic plantations around the state, some of the family farms that have been in operation for many, many generations, and just how present it really is. So economically, it's a huge part. Culturally, it's a big part of our identity. I think in the early 1900s, the Florida really started developing its identity around the orange. And so globally, we are one of the biggest exporters of orange concentrate and orange juice and oranges. And we're known iconically around the world for that. And so Florida participates in both national markets and international markets because we have beautiful climate here, one of the best biomes in the world for all kinds of different lives, different production, pests, biodiversity, things like that. We can have a pretty fruitful abundance. And so Florida has played a main role in providing a whole variety of crops. So not just to our kitchen tables, but to those throughout the nation and the world. And so it's a huge part of our identity. So, economically, culturally, and then also physically. Or just around half of the land in the state is somehow tied to agriculture. And so agriculture is not just food production. A lot of times people think ag equals food, but agriculture actually is the food, fuel, and fiber. And so when you see big swaths of forestry, that is also a part of agriculture. And so when you think, when I drive around Florida, I don't see half of it full of, produce. That's not the extent to what agriculture is. And so, we have our rivers have historically shipped all kinds of agricultural products up into different parts of the nation. And now in the modern world, we have many ports that both receive and ship agricultural goods. So it's a huge part of our state's identity. And I recently learned that the average American, this is true for Floridians, is 3 generations away from being on the farm. So over the past 3 generations, we've all kind of gotten more urban, but the presence of agriculture is still very, very strong, very, very vivid in our state. And whether you kind of realize it or not, it's all around you, and it's a huge driving force.
Wow, Monica, that definitely frames out the importance of agriculture. And with all of these questions that I'm going to ask, certainly if any of the panelists have anything to add, that they should definitely feel free to step in. But our next question actually goes in fairly well as a follow-up to that question. And I'll pose this one to Dr. Campbell. With the prices of agriculture inputs and food constantly rising, what steps can Florida policymakers and ag stakeholders, including colleges and universities, take to create more resiliency and price stability in our food? Because I mean, to be honest, that's what a lot of us are worried about now with inflation. I mean, what's going on with these prices, and what can we do and the institutions in Florida do to help create more resiliency?
Well, thanks, Mark. That's a great question, and especially hard question. As we all know, we've been struggling with inflation and issues with supply chains. And so looking at agriculture and ways that we can support agriculture is really important for thinking about regional resilience. So I think, from my point of view, the things that we can do to support resilience and hopefully address some of the costs of food are supporting local agriculture and regional supply chains. And so by regional supply chains, I just mean, maybe not in your immediate town, but, within the state of Florida, supporting agriculture. So we all remember in COVID, the grocery store shelves were empty. And that was partially because the food that was in those stores came from across the country. And when we have pandemics or natural disasters, those long supply chains get disrupted. But what we saw was small farms, local farms were able to step in, pivot, and do their sales to the local community, which supported that resilience and access to food during that crisis and others. I think another way, you mentioned colleges and universities, they can support local food systems by purchasing more local food, getting more local food into the dining halls at the universities. Another really important thing to think about is having laws and policies that support all farms at both the state and local level, because we need both large and small farms. They contribute to communities in different ways. As we know, all of us here in Florida are familiar with our rapid urbanization. And so part of what we need to be thinking about with these laws and policies are protecting land for current agricultural production, as well as future agricultural production. And we did a study over the last couple of years on urban agriculture. And so Florida has 47 out of 67 counties are now considered urban. And so essentially, almost all of the agriculture in Florida is either urban agriculture or it's being encroached by urban areas. And so thinking about removing regulatory hurdles and barriers for those farms, that's the one thing that we found is the farmers said, that, they were spending so much time and money trying to overcome regulatory hurdles with, the friction of sort of urbanization and farming. And so having those kinds of policies that can help support food production and help farmers be able to focus on farming, which is what they're good at, which should help them be more successful and help support some of that price stability.
Yeah, that's great input for sure. The local, being a state like Florida that has so many hurricanes, so much agricultural disease pressure, the diversity of farms and farmers, location, crops, just so important. Anyone else have anything to add to that question? And I don't know if we want to put up the question again. Any of our other panelists, that was a wonderful question, but our response, Catherine, but definitely has a lot of nuances and areas to go down. And I was wondering, as we think about that, if there are any other questions or things that people have, definitely put them in the Q&A for us to go deeper in any of these areas. But any other thoughts from the stakeholders on this panel about how we can create more resiliency and price stability?
Hello, I'd like to chime in here if
Narcissus?
possible. Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about agriculture in Florida. Any chance I get, I'll probably take it. So as far as colleges and universities, just a little background. At Valencia College, we have a 2-year program, but also technical certificates at the 12, 18, and 30 credit mark. But we work closely with our advisory committee that's comprised of members from the theme parks that take some of our alumni, farms, big biotech companies like AgriStarts, where Dr. Campbell is at. So we're working or trying to work with the industry, the business community, ask them, what are your needs as far as, a trained workforce, and how can we make sure that you have that moving forward? And I think the more food that we're able to grow in Florida, the better off we are. I have to hand it off to the panelists. This has been very enjoyable so far. It's exciting just to be part of this, and a lot of good information has already been presented. But when you look at Florida, and we're so up there when it comes to the value of vegetable production, for example, in the whole United States, we're number 2. When it comes to ornamentals, which is a whole other aspect of agriculture, and I'm glad Monica mentioned forestry. A lot of people think agriculture and they think overalls and a pitchfork. That's okay. If you want to be an off-the-grid, uber organic farmer, you could do that, but there's a lot more to agriculture than just that. So I should probably stop now. I just wanted to chime in, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for sharing about that crossover between tourism and the hospitality industry, which a lot of people think about, and food. Who doesn't like to have good local food when they go on vacation? So let's keep on promoting that. I see we have 44 participants on listening to us right now live. This is also being recorded. I'm curious to know, and I think our panelists would also be curious to know, at what level are the people that are tuning in here interested in this topic called agriculture? We've been talking about the significance to Florida and the Florida economy, but there's also other levels. A lot of us are interested in backyard gardening, community gardening, or global food. So out of curiosity, if you were to choose one, when you think about the most connection that you have with agricultural food systems, what level are you most interested in? So why don't we go ahead and give you guys a minute to complete that, answer the poll, and then maybe someone from ISPS can let us know what the poll results are. All right, so do we have a graph or something that we can see last chance, if you haven't made a selection, there should be a poll that's up on your screen. What level of agriculture are you most interested in?
Okay, I'll close it out and then it'll display on everybody's
Thank
screen.
you, Kyle. Appreciate that so much. Wow, so we have a pretty diverse group. Definitely more slated on, more than 50% in the backyard or neighborhood variety, but then also county, region, and state. So that's great. We'll definitely cover both of those. So I appreciate you displaying that. I know we have a lot of local food systems experts here on the call. And I know Dr. Campbell mentioned, just the importance of that resiliency at a local level. I will say, there are challenges with doing that, the urban agricultural challenges. So our next question that we have, I'll point to Monica, because I know you work with a lot of collaborations, especially where you're at. So who is collaborating on the different levels that we're talking about, neighborhood, county, state, for an improved, sustainable food system in Florida?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about the results of that poll because it definitely showed that people are very interested in more of this kind of hyper-local county regional approach, which is like exactly what my expertise is. So, in the introduction, Kim did a great job, but just to kind of clarify, I have the honor of being the food system coordinator here in Hillsborough County. It's the first time we've had a position like this. And ultimately, what it is my job is to create a centralized place, whether that is like physical or online, where all kinds of stakeholders in the food system can come and collaborate and coordinate. And the goal is to be able to create a countywide food system plan that can meet the county's needs. And so within that statement, each of those different sections of that goal is very specific to where you are. So I'm in Hillsborough County, and so I'm very fluent in Hillsborough County food system planning, but I know, close to nothing about Alachua County or Leon County. Sure, there's a lot of like common trends amongst the different counties, but different growing season biomes, urban density, all kinds of cultural issues or differences, not really issues. And so here in Hillsborough County, the answer to that question, who wants to get involved in creating a more collaborative food system, the answer is by and large, everybody. And that really was already kind of in the works over the last 10 years. People have kind of started, I think, maybe tuning in more to health and the environment, and this idea of the triple bottom line with sustainability kind of started fueling a little bit of this move more towards local, supporting small. And so when I was in college at the University of Florida, this was kind of on the rise. And then, like Kim said, I went and got my master's degree at the University of Vermont. And Vermont actually is a fantastic example of what a community food system, a local food system can look like. Each of their regions have member-owned, locally sourced grocery stores. A lot of the cafeterias are sourcing local. A lot of the people have edible landscapes in their yards. And that wasn't done overnight. That was done over 70 years of a cultural identity and a deliberate kind of initiative. And so all of that has been bubbling in the background. And then really what galvanized it was the pandemic. People started kind of reconsidering their dependence on how convenient it is just to go to the grocery store and get an avocado in, any time of the year, and even kind of just how lucky we are to be able to have these very fluid, very reliable systems. And so after we kind of had that yanked from us a little bit, people started saying, maybe it's worthwhile to create some of these systems locally. And so within the food system, agriculture production is just one of many components. And so generally the food system, the way that it is conveyed is through a graphic that is a circle that is self-fulfilling. So you have production at the top. The very first thing is you got to grow the food. Then after that, you have to distribute it. It has to go from the farm to a market or to a grocery store or to a restaurant. And then from there, people have to be able to access it. And then the next step is they have to consume it. And so, when we talk about health and health equity, what works for me and my health goals might be different for somebody who lives in a different community. There's a lot of ways to accomplish your nutrient goals and your protein goals and your macros and all of that. But it's the exercise that is the most efficient is the one you'll do. The health strategy that is the most effective is the one that you'll participate in. And so if I'm telling people that they need to eat quinoa and they just don't like it, then that's not going to be a strategy for them to be able to get their grains. And so each of these community kind of goals has to be approached at that level. And so what we're seeing here in Hillsborough County is that lots of people from every sector are very interested in doing this food system work. And so to complete kind of that cycle, so after consumption, a lot of times there is leftover organic ingredients. And so that would ideally be some of this waste recovery resource recycling that can maybe then be used for compost that goes into your production, and you have that kind of full circle. So each of those components makes up the food system. And within each of those components, there are dozens of organizations that are hyper-focused in it. So my goal is to understand what each of these organizations and their individual capacities and their individual organizational goals want to do and how that relates to a greater food system initiative. And so we're actually starting that process here in Hillsborough this year. Hopefully this next month, we're going to kind of start asking those questions and seeing what organizations want to do. And then at the end of this year-long process, we're going to be able to sit back and say, all right, out of the 250 organizations, whether they were nonprofits, for-profits, neighborhood associations, grassroots groups, policy, neighborhood association, any kind of organization, they really want to see a farm to school program. So what does that look like? What does that mean? How does it impact our food system? How is that contributing towards a more sustainable and resilient future? And that's just one of the options. Other things like urban ag. I saw in the Q&A that one of the attendants here today was talking about Florida is getting highly urbanized. Dr. Campbell mentioned it too. What can we do? And the answer is there's a lot of options. And it's a matter of kind of creating that culture of community food and creating that culture where people are opting into kind of their own food future, instead of just relying fully on, I know that Publix is going to have exactly what I need because they always have and they always will. We definitely all experience, maybe they won't always, for whatever reason, whether it is global political economy or infectious disease or hurricanes or railroads or whatever it is. And so the answer is everybody's interested, and it's up to communities to kind of get organized and determine what that future looks for them. And so here in Hillsborough, we're starting that process. Would love to kind of, talk to anybody in different counties or people in Hillsborough and let them know kind of the nitty gritty of that, but that could be its own hour-long panel. So did that answer your question, Mark?
Somewhat. Before, there's a lot of Q&A that you answered within the context of that answer, and I want to highlight that and maybe turn it over to Dr. Campbell and something she wanted to share related to that. But before I do, Monica, I do have a question for you still, which is, you didn't drop any names or categories. So if I'm a person that's looking to get involved, I know everyone can be involved, but are there particular, if you don't want to name particular groups, even things that I can Google to get involved with, like categories of type of organizations that I can maybe influence or learn more about these terms, which I'm going to ask Dr. Campbell to unpack some of these terms like regenerative and sustainability and things like that you mentioned. But what are some of those groups, Monica? And then we'll turn it over to Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, so probably the most kind of popular avenue for food system coordinations is food policy councils. And so in Florida, there's a food policy council in Tallahassee, there's one in Orlando, there's one in Pasco County. I believe that somewhere down in the Miami area, they have one too. St. Pete, the city of St. Pete recently developed a food policy council. And so, so anybody that is not here in Hillsborough that is interested in kind of getting involved in that work, I would encourage them to you can Google food policy council and your location and see if anything comes up. A lot of times these are very grassroots efforts. And so, so it might be a Facebook page. It might not be a full-on organization or institute, but if you want to contribute towards that, then you can join and start building. And then for people that are in Hillsborough, our program here is called Homegrown Hillsborough, and that is going to be how Hillsborough County residents are going to get involved. And so there's going to be a process to get involved. There's a little bit of some policies and procedures just to kind of get everything standardized. And what we're going to do is throughout this next year, anybody who wants to get involved can contact me, and you can look up Homegrown Hillsborough online. It's soon going to have its own independent website that'll have all this information there. But for those people that don't live in Hillsborough and don't have a food policy council, I would very much encourage them to go to their local extension office. Every single county in Florida has one, and extension already provides a lot of these services that are kind of wrapped up into this food system development, but not every extension office is acknowledging it as a food system approach. But Extension is a public service. It is responsive to its constituents. Its constituents are the taxpayers in its county. And so if there's interest, then you can approach your extension office and say, I want to do food system development. I've heard about similar programs in Hillsborough or different counties, and I want to see what we can do here. And I feel like that will be very welcomed, and that extension agents would be happy to start working on that with you. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. Some counties are kind of ahead and others. I'm hoping that Hillsborough will be able to be a model through our Homegrown Hillsborough initiative.
That's great, Monica. Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Monica. Monica is such a wealth of knowledge. I just wanted to share, I have an infographic that is a graphical representation of the food system that Monica was discussing. This is available on, there's a UF IFAS Community Food Systems and Urban Agriculture website, where we created this partially because I think there's still a struggle of people even understanding what the food system is. Those of us who work in food systems throw around the term and really understand. But it's a very complicated network of everything from the inputs and land that go into food production to all of the people and supply chains. And Monica went through all of that. But I think, this infographic was designed to either help, people in the audience who may not know what this is, or people who might want to work with policymakers to help educate them on the various aspects of the food system and how policies can support that. We also, on that website, there are a variety of tools and resources for things like people want to support urban agriculture, policy and planning at the local level. So what kinds of plans can you put in place to support food systems resilience? And then also there's a section on how to support food security and public health via the food system. So I think if you Google IFAS Community Food Systems and Urban Ag, there's a lot of resources there, and anybody can reach out to me if they would like to as well.
Is what you're showing us, Catherine, resilient, regenerative, sustainable, all of these words that we use, what do they mean, and how do they relate to what we're looking at?
Mark, you have all the hard questions. So Monica talked about the triple bottom line of sustainability. So that's really just looking at a food system, that is economically sustainable, socially sustainable, and environmentally sustainable. And you have to have, it's like the three legs of a stool. If you remove any one part of it, it's not really going to be sustainable in the long term. Regenerative, I would throw that over to Dr. Garces, because I'm a social scientist, and so I'm not an expert on that. But resilience and sustainability are sort of paired concepts, where you need, for something to be resilient, it has to be sustainable. But then the concept of resilience has to do with being able to respond to shocks sort of organically in a way that you have kind of built-in redundancies. And I've recently published a paper about this, so I'm kind of in the weeds in the literature, but essentially the idea of resilience is it's not just sustainable, but it can withstand unpredictable shocks and bounce back.
Great,
So
great answer. Thank you so much for fielding all the hard questions. I know that you could do that. So we do want to turn it over to Dr. Garces. I think you have a lot to add here. You can definitely, if you want to tackle that regenerative question, do that. But my question for you, I want to pivot a little bit to workforce. And you talked about being a farmer yourself and having worked in the industry, and now maintaining that love at the local community college at Valencia there. So what barriers are there for a young person to become a successful farmer, especially young people? A lot of our community college folks come from disadvantaged backgrounds. They may not have a lot of wealth. How can they become a farmer?
Another great question, Mark. Thank you for that. So I think one of the biggest obstacles, if not the biggest across the board, is lack of knowledge. In other words, the majority of young people today don't think that agriculture is even an option, right? They think agriculture is, you're not going to be able to make a good living, have a career, etc. So I think that's part of one of the biggest problems, really, because I've been at the college now for 14 years. And I still hear from students and sometimes other faculty members, wow, I didn't even know we had that program. Oh, what types of careers are available? How long has that program been around? It's been around about 40 years. So it's definitely standing the test of time. But I think one of the goals should be for us is to get into the schools at the middle school level and let students know at that level, looking forward in life. Not everybody's going to be a doctor or a lawyer, and eventually a lot of people that practice law or have a law degree don't even practice law. So look at what other options you have to make a good career. So I think one of the biggest barriers just really is lack of information, right? These younger students don't know about this option, about the option, of agriculture, horticulture, etc. When you start telling them, well, think about it. And one thing I like to tell my students here in Central Florida and Orlando, we're very lucky to live where we live. I know Monica was talking about climate, geographic. Just think about the variety from North Florida to South Florida, from Homestead to Panama City, and all the various crops we could grow, from peanuts to petunias and everything in between, right? Everybody always needs to eat, and they always want the yards and hotels, resorts looking nice. So there's people that are going to be growing food and taking care of the landscape. And these are very good paying jobs that really last for careers that allow you to raise a family. A lot of them, though, think that it's just hard work for low pay. So I think that's really one of the biggest barriers, is letting them know that there's options available. I get phone calls and emails all the time from nurseries and companies here in Central Florida looking for people. Our program has now close to, I think, 350 students or so in the program. Our placement rate is close to 100%, if not 100%. In other words, there's plenty of opportunities available for younger people to make a good, decent living working outside at least part of the time. That's one thing I love about my job. Yes, I'm in the classroom, but then we have the living labs, we have greenhouses, I visit farms, I take students on field trips to show them you could have a life beyond an office. No offense to everyone who's in an office, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's some of us that prefer to have that option to at least be outside and work with nature. And that's one thing I've really been pleased about Florida in general over the last several decades. Even in the ornamental industry, there's been more of a move toward best management practices, toward using fertilizer and irrigation more efficiently. There's jobs available also in agriculture that you'll never step foot on a farm. Think of all the drones that we're using now for scouting purposes to go over a field and look for bugs and diseases. Drones now being remotely controlled, operated to apply even organic pesticides. And I know pesticides is a very bad word that no one likes to hear, but I just want to put it out there. Even in organic farms, they're spraying organic pesticides. Think of beneficial microbiology, beneficial fungi, bacteria to combat the pathogens. So we need microbiologists, engineers, remote control operators, farmers, plumbers, electricians. So think about, when we think of agriculture, that the opportunities are very vast for a young person today, that's for sure.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely think a lot of people in our cities kind of grow up thinking that if you want a good job, you have to focus on technology or something that's very, specific to computers or something like that. But you're saying that there are good jobs out there and you have a high placement rate in agriculture. And I know one of the questions in our Q&A is, why should a young person invest in learning about these agricultural trends? So you gave some good reasons there. Anything else that you say, just as a person who's learned and taught, any further follow-up about why young people, whether they're going to go into a career or not, should be interested in this?
Well, if they're going to go to career-wise, as far as looking at your future, what type of life do you want to live, what career job do you want to have, etc. And it was probably the same when Monica was at UF, I was at UF, and I remember being a student, and the problem I had was deciding on which opportunity to take when it came to employment. The same thing is happening decades later to my students at Valencia. The problem isn't not finding an opportunity, it's deciding which one to take, right? And then if you're not focused on this as a career, something that this panel has definitely touched on is food system security, food resiliency. Where does your food come from? I'm not a nutritionist. I need to look more into the whole nutritional aspect. From the way I understand it, the fresher the food, the more packed it is with nutrients. The fresher the food, the lower the carbon footprint. The fresher the food, the closer it is to your area, and the more secure it is that you're going to be able to actually get your hands on it. So even if someone is not going to go into this industry, and agriculture is that big umbrella, think about where your food comes from. And that's just a very simple, basic human need that most of us don't give a lot of thought to.
No, that's great. So how can our colleges, and how are you in your program helping students with barriers? We're talking about the equity issue. Maybe they've never grown up on a farm. Maybe they've never experienced this. What are some of those challenges that you help students overcome to become successful food producers?
That's a great question, and a tough one as well. So keep it up. So I think one of, at least at the college, so I have my my program, right, the plant science program. I have to make sure I'm working closely with admissions, financial aid, student development, student services, so that those students know, regardless of their background, where they come from, the resources they have available, that this is an option for them. Financially speaking, many of them think they can't afford it. There are a ton of programs out there, scholarships, fellowships, financial assistance programs to help them get their foot in the door. And I think this is something that's really been promoted at the college a lot over the last several years, is that you're making sure every student feels welcome. On day one, you're trying to develop that one-on-one relationship, because here's one thing I've really enjoyed about teaching over the last 14 years or so. The average age of students in the program for us is 31 years old. That means we have a lot of young students, some in between. I've had students in their 70s. And you could see kind of what we call the college, the non-traditional student, giving some advice, a helping hand to those younger students that really, up until they started the class, didn't know that was even an option for them, right? So one thing we try to also do at Valencia is work with the high school ag programs to make sure that at least they know there's an option for them to continue to study and hopefully one day work in agriculture.
Oh, that's great. Those are all the prepared questions that we had for our panelists, but you guys have provided more than questions than we have time to answer. So I'm going to turn the difficult job of deciding which questions and who to pose those to to Kim Jackson. So Attorney Jackson, take it over.
Not too difficult. So the one thing I'm going to ask all of our panelists too is to make sure that all of your cameras on so we can all jump in and have a conversation. Our tech lead is going to change our view so we can have a more fruitful, engaged conversation, because I want to make sure that all expertise is represented, because as I was telling our team when we were doing this program, this is not my expertise. I delve in a lot, but this is something I'm just really like to hear about. And I also want to say to each of you all, you raised 3 key points before I bring up the question. The first is that we are the second largest economic driver. Monica said 9 billion. That is amazing. This should be an econ program that we work with our business department. You talked about food security, Dr. Campbell, and that's something I'm extremely interested in. When we talk about disease processes, we should have also had our nurses on for this program and a lot of our scientists. And then finally, we talked about, the reach of job opportunities and workforce. And as you were going through all those different levels of opportunities, I was thinking, how can we do a better job of educating youth and just people who are transitioning in jobs or the expertise they want to lend once they go from one profession to another, of how they can make use of this. So as you're thinking about ways for your last wrap up comments, the first question is from Maria, and it talks about the Bay Area being under enormous pressure and development is critical for property tax revenue. Can we discuss the idea of creating a farmland trust? I'm sort of summarizing her question, but in general, the role of agricultural land conservation, urban farms, and community gardens and food resilience. And is there any conversation about this? So any one of you all, please jump in as I go on to the next question.
I can actually answer that. So here in Hillsborough, we have kind of the beginning pieces of what a community land trust respective to agriculture production could look like. It's happening at a very small scale. Sweetwater Organic Community Farm was the first kind of direct to consumer farm in Florida to offer something called a CSA, which stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And what this is, a CSA is a process in which before the growing season happens, consumers buy in to ultimately a share of the farm. And then as the season goes on, they are entitled to a share of the harvest, of the dividend. And so CSAs are a pretty common mechanism for more of these smaller farmers that don't have the massive capital to do giant quality control, food safety, kind of some of that bigger infrastructure needs. They do smaller kind of subscriptions as a way to think of it. And so Sweetwater Organic Farm has been, they were the first farm in Florida to offer a CSA. They've been around for, I think, almost 30 years. And when they got their land off East Hillsborough Ave, Town and Country was still very close to being closer to the rural side of things. And now for any of you that are familiar with Hillsborough County, that northwest corner is just suburbs, full development. The only real green spaces are those that are preserved for parks or conservation. And so this 7-acre farm that has been here for 30 years and watched development around them, they're reading the signs on the wall and saying, if we want to save this land to remain as a farm beyond the current operator, but beyond this generation, we need to introduce a mechanism that's going to call for that long term. And so that's what a land trust does. Land trusts are really tricky. First of all, land is incredibly expensive. And so, there is a person that owns that land and they are ultimately being asked to forego millions of dollars in personal profit and gain in order to commit this land into a land trust for the future generations to use, which is a big ask. Luckily, the owner and the operator of Sweetwater is already bought into that idea. That was part of his vision a long time ago. And so so even though it's a big ask, he was happy to kind of meet the moment. And so what we need to do is start talking to other farmers who are experiencing that pressure and really kind of try to let them know that if they were to contribute their land into a farmland trust or a community land trust, then we as the community can organize systems to make sure that there will always be someone working that land. Because I think that's what they're scared of, right? Is if they don't, if they keep their land as agricultural production, but we don't do a good enough job at making sure that we have the workforce, kind of what Dr. Garces was talking about, and the passion and the culture and the people that want to continue that heritage, then maybe they just gave up their land to a conservation trust for ultimately to sit empty, which is not what they want either. And so land trusts are very complicated. They take lots of legal experts and land use experts, and then at the end of the day, the landowner is ultimately making a sacrifice to their personal gain for the longevity of this collective vision. And so it's possible. There's a lot of interest in it, but it definitely it is a lift. And I know that Dr. Campbell wants to kind of speak on this as well, so I'll just pass it to her.
Thanks, Monica. I think, you hit the nail on the head with it is tricky. And there are a lot of things that you have to get right to have something like that work. And I know that from the work I do around the state, working with local government, what people are really looking for are successful models. They want to see a case where, how did this work? What stakeholders had to be involved? What were the processes? What were potential pitfalls? How were they dealt with? And so what you gave is a perfect example of a case where everything fell into place and, it worked, but that's a great case study or an example that could be shown to other communities that want to explore those kinds of opportunities for themselves.
And just to kind of run out the question, I actually, for those participants that are interested in learning more about this, there's a nonprofit that is not based in Florida and it doesn't do work in Florida yet, but it's called Agrarian Trust. And their whole deal is talking to existing farm families and getting them to contribute their land into farmland trusts and community land trusts. And so there's a few examples in West Virginia and Tennessee, I think maybe up in New York State. And I just got an email from them recently that announced another new success story. So they're slowly going to some of these states that have a mosaic of small family farms, that these farmers are aging out and maybe their kids don't want to take on the agricultural responsibilities, but maybe their neighbor does. And so there's this process. So Agrarian Trust is a great thing for anyone to search and kind of click around on their website. They have a lot of informational videos and stuff too. So that's a good example of the fact that it can work. And then they're also legal experts that can help communities accomplish these goals in their own neighborhoods.
All right, I'm going to try to jump in, put in 3 questions at once because we're running out the clock. So I'll talk fast, and to the extent you all can keep up, I appreciate it. So there are 3 questions that seem to talk about policy and all are the same. And to sum them up, where does our food go? How much is our food retained here? And what kind of policies does Florida have that influences here us locally or at the state level? And then to add to that, in terms of food security, can you add to the geographic levels of food security? I think I added all 3. And finally, to add to that, what inexpensive imported produce floods into Florida, and how do we raise agricultural wages? So that's 3 questions: policy, food in, food out, security, and wages. Go.
I've been talking a lot, but I'll go ahead and kind of start, and then hopefully Dr. Campbell and Dr. Garces can kind of contribute. So where does our food go? Our food goes to the highest bidder. And for us here in Florida, because we are surrounded by so much variety and abundance, sometimes the highest bidder is not here. And so when you think of states like New York, they're paying $10 for a thing of strawberries that Floridians would really struggle to pay more than 2 for $5 at their grocery store. And that's just because we're kind of spoiled. That's because enough people here eventually would say, well, I can just do that myself. And so a lot of times our food goes to the highest bidder, which is out of state. People who can't take advantage of having a family citrus tree in their backyard, or knowing someone, or going down the road to a you pick strawberry. They're cold and dreary, and they're cold and dreary states, and they're happy to pay $10 for a small pint of strawberries. And then so that's largely kind of how our national infrastructure works. The concept of food security is an incredibly dynamic and vast one. There's a lot of community interventions that can be done to kind of combat that. But food insecurity wasn't created overnight, and so it's ultimately at this point now a generational effort. In which point that food insecurity means a whole bunch of different things, but one of like the main indicators is a lack of produce, fruits, and vegetables in someone's diet. So sure, they can go to the corner store and get ramen, but technically that is not going to satisfy all of their nutrient needs, and so they still are food insecure because they are unable to get that nutrients that everyone needs, that all healthy bodies need. And so unfortunately what kind of the issue is now is we could go out and give every person in a low income, low access, food insecure, neighborhood a basket of produce. We could go do that this weekend. Most of that produce would sit and rot and be thrown away because there is a whole wraparound cultural aspect of people don't know how to make an eggplant. Kids don't want to eat kale chips. Children think that pears come from the can. And so that's really nobody's fault. And as a community, we can all collectively come together and do some of these interventions. We can start making programs fun and interactive. And if we can work with the school district to introduce some vegetable on their plates, and then maybe we can ask mom and dad to do it again, and then maybe next month they'll see it again at the grocery store. Slowly that cultural kind of shift will happen, and you'll kind of start seeing some more of that. Of course, local production, people who live in areas where they can't get access to produce. Meacham Urban Farms is a really great example in Tampa. It's downtown Tampa in a food insecure tract, and they have a 2-acre highly productive plot, and they're doing really good work there, kind of setting the model. So that's there's the kind of takeaway of all of that is we all need to get together and make a deliberate plan, because every single one of these issues needs to be not just adjacent to our main goal, but our main goal, and that's going to take a while. So, and that last question, that's for one of these other professionals.
Before you answer, thank you so much, Monica. That was a great response, and I appreciate it. I'm going to try to get the last 2 questions in because we are running over. So Dr. Garces and Dr. Campbell, as you're answering the last questions, and whichever one of you finishes last, I'll wrap up after that. Will you also contemplate the impact of immigration and what incentives are being placed to prevent human trafficking or hiring or taking in farm workers from rural areas? And if either one of you know about Florida House Bill 173 that's been introduced, I just had our team research it while we were on here. If you have anything to add about policy before we end, I'd certainly appreciate it. Yes, Dr. Garces.
Yeah, I'll just jump in briefly here. When we're looking at policies to some of the previous questions, as far as one of the question was about products that are imported from outside of the country into Florida. So Florida's unique in many ways. One of the main ways is that our growing season is the opposite of the rest of the country, and it aligns more with places like Mexico. So for example, our Florida tomato farmers are battling policies that would favor foreign farmers like from Mexico, where the other farmers in California, for example, or other parts of the country, you don't have to worry about the Mexican dumping. Well, that's what we call it, dumping of tomatoes on the market, which then lowers the price and makes it unaffordable. So I think Florida's in a tough spot there. Both our farmers, and I never thought I would say our politicians are in a tough spot, but I guess here they are, because at the federal level, it's Florida versus the rest of the country. When you look at our farming systems, and then policy-wise, that's kind of a tough sell. So I'll leave it at that. That's my 2 cents, and then I'll turn it over here to Dr. Campbell.
Well, I can speak a little bit to food as medicine. I'm not familiar with the Florida House Bill, but there's a lot of interest in food as food as medicine. And I know, or I think Mark used to work in that area as well. And I think it gets to what Monica was talking about in terms of the whole wraparound where, you know, you've got people producing food, but you may not have, you know, the people to implement a program. So that's where, you know, we who work in cooperative extension, and we work within communities, and we have those relationships with community members that are built on trust, that we can then implement a program and connect them with food and connect them with healthcare providers to support that food access and nutrition security, as Monica was getting at. It's not just about calories, it's about the nutritional quality of the food that people are getting. And so it takes a full food systems approach where you're addressing the producers and healthcare providers, as well as connecting with community members to meet their food needs in ways that are socially and culturally appropriate to them.
Well, Mark, do you want to have one final last word before we wrap up? And I just say thank you to this incredibly substantive panel. I know that when we send this out, that you all will get a lot more questions. I wish we had more time to discuss it, and I'm very grateful for your time. But Mark, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Campbell. We definitely have invested in food as medicine from the Humana Foundation side, as well as the Humana Inc. side, and I'd be happy to follow up with anybody, you know, to share more about those previous investments, and also ideate around future investments and ways that we can advance those policies and opportunities for the citizens of Florida, because it's really important, as has been evidenced by the wonderful participation with our panel and all the great questions that came in that we haven't had a chance to answer. So please continue to reach out. And thank you, Kim, for always hosting a wonderful dialogue of people for some issues that are very pressing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have about 3 more programs left for the Institute before we finish out for this spring semester. Again, we invite you to go to our website at isps.spcollege.edu. We welcome your feedback. We have surveys that you can let us learn more about what you want to hear about. But we're decided to keep it light and do a conversation with Peter Kageyama. He's a well-known author in town and speaks on a plethora of topics. But for this topic, he's going to talk about why dogs are important to community conversations and while we're breaking down silos in this manner for civility. So we hope that you join us for that program. Then after that, maybe I'll invite more of you all back to discuss the bill we just found out. We're having a program at our sister college at Pasco Hernando State College. We would love it if you would share this with anyone that is in person. We're trying to do better about reaching out and doing programs with our other sister colleges within the Florida college system. So for that, we also thank the university system too for joining us today. And that will be the nursing workforce dilemma. And then finally, we're going to do something local, and that is the state of the beaches, because the conversation is germane all over the beautiful state of Florida. And that conversation revolves around how we're doing in the community. And we do this every year. As usual, we're very grateful for your time. Please join us if you have any questions, if you'd like to support us, we're always open to that. And I want to thank our, again, wonderful panel. If you want to follow us on social media, we appreciate that. But join us, please, at isps.spcollege.edu or on Facebook or Instagram. Have a great one.